Hi. Thank you so much for being here. This is just a thrill for so many reasons, but also because I really believe your time is so deeply valuable. You know, there are so many things you can and should be doing in any one moment in America. And so using some of your time to spend it with me, thank you. Thank you, yeah. So I'm so excited to talk with Marvin. I lived in San Francisco, October 2012 to October 2013, and during that time period, yeah, it was a good time, good year, thank you. And during that time, we got to do a reading together, so this is a lovely kind of full circle moment. But before he comes out, I wanted to give us, some tools that we can all use collectively tonight for the conversation. We'll talk, and then I'm sure you have questions too. This is from really the climax of the book. It's the beginning of a climactic chapter that in some ways all of the threads of the book come together in this moment. And just what you need to know in terms of facts if you haven't read the book yet. I went to school in Bowling Green, Kentucky. That's where Western Kentucky University is. That's Rand Paul's district, if you want some context for what that might have been like. But in this chapter, I'm visiting friends in Phoenix, Arizona, where ASU is located. And in college at that point, I had dreadlocks. So at one point I mentioned that. So, a different moment. It was like 5 Rihannas ago. Actually probably 10. Okay. Chapter 15, December 31st, 2007, Phoenix, Arizona. A joke I used to repeat in those days was, why be happy when you can be interesting? I knew how to be interesting. There was power in being a spectacle, even a miserable spectacle. The punch and the line. Interesting. Sentences like serrated blades, laughter like machine gun rounds, a drink in one hand, a borrowed cigarette in the other. If you could draw enough glances, any room could orbit around you. That New Year's Eve, I wound up at a party that was exactly like every party I had ever been to. An iPod hooked up to a pair of speakers, an awkward costume theme I tried and failed to adhere to, and an apartment clogged with white people. The only difference was that I was getting wasted in Phoenix, Arizona, instead of Bowling Green, Kentucky. In the few days I had been there, I had concluded that Arizona was perhaps the whitest place I had ever visited. It was like stepping onto the surface of a very well-lit moon. The party's theme was the future, which is why more than half the people in attendance were wearing some combination of synthetic fabric, aluminum foil, and sunglasses. I hadn't known that there would be a theme, and the only other shirt I had packed was a blue calico button-down. So I put my dreadlocks into 2 pigtails and kept telling everyone I was Dorothy. No one found this in any way strange because, of course, this was the future. And all bets are off in the year 2075. Over the last few years at college parties just like this one, I had been an ice queen. I had been Plato with a boy dressed as Aristotle in tow. I had been the hot pink negligee all nuns wear under their robes. I'd been Dorothy from Kansas, fake poppy blossoms woven into my dreadlocks. Maybe a theme like the future was supposed to get us to wonder, starry-eyed, what the future would be like. But I couldn't find it in myself. Instead, all I could wonder was whether there would be a future left for any of us. A black man was running to become president of the United States of America, and I was checking the news every morning, anxious, half expecting to read that he had been assassinated. Lately, I had been calling home less. I hadn't even told my mom I was going to be in Phoenix for the holiday. A professor who had known me since I was a freshman confronted me in her office just before the fall semester ended. "What happened to you, Saeed?" she said. "You used to smile." I stared at the professor blankly, then remembered that this was the part where I was supposed to cry. So I cried. This was a future I would have to figure out on my own, but I didn't want to think about it, at least for one more night. I wanted to dance at a huge, messy party and get blackout drunk. In this particular version of the future, I was one of 3 out gay men at the party, and the other 2 were dating each other. They're married now, it's trash. But I would find a way. I wanted to spend the night in someone else's body, or let someone borrow mine. For the first few hours of the party, either I didn't notice him, or the man who would later try to kill me simply had not arrived yet. All night, I was a terrific, bright black mess. I stomped, slinked, sauntered in and out of the kitchen to refill my cup or do shots. I shouted orders about songs that should be added to the party's playlist. Out on the porch, smoking cigarettes, then passing around a blunt, I stared at an orange tree just out of reach until I finally plucked off a fruit. It seemed miraculous. Oranges in the dead of winter. Then I realized the unseen side of the fruit was rotted, ants pouring out of the ruin like ink. Looking back, I can see how someone might see me that night and argue that I had it coming, that I had a man like him coming. If that someone was America herself, I can understand how she might rattle off a warning. That black boy has been too hungry for too long. One of these nights, he's gonna bite off more than he can chew. I will say for myself, America, I did the best I could with what I was given. The man, let's call him Daniel, looked familiar when I saw him from across the room, as if each part of him had been borrowed from some other boy or man I had wanted. Leaning against that wall, dispassionately sipping a beer, he was the kind of quiet I have noticed in certain men and long hungered for. The silence of men who have it all and thus find it all boring, who don't exert the energy necessary to flirt, persuade, or convince because they know America will come crawling to them on hands and knees. I realize now that what I wanted was not just the bodies of such men, but their power, and what they could use that power to do to the rest of us. The brutal exertion of will, destiny made manifest by the unspoken threat their muscled body and white skin posed. I hungered for the power of the all-American man, the Marlboro Man, and the Marlboro Man's firstborn son, the high school quarterback, the company's future CEO, Ernest Hemingway, John Wayne, Odysseus, Hercules, Achilles, the shield itself, the stone-cut archetype, the goddamned everyman, the golden boy, the one. If I could not actually be the one myself, I thought I could survive by devouring him whole. The more straight, the more masculine, the more I wanted to see him with his legs spread or up, back arched in an orgasm that did not just bring him pleasure, but a warning. In spite of the man you say you are, in the future I live in, men like me are coming to conquer you, and we will take no prisoners. This is what I thought it meant to be a man fighting for his life. If America was going to hate me for being black and gay, then I might as well make a weapon out of myself. Thank you. I'm just gonna hang out. Oh, there you are. Hi! Woo! Get over here. Hi, bro.
Well, hello.
Hi.
How y'all doing?
Ooh, the curtains.
Come on now, Saeed Jones, y'all.
Thank you. Stop it.
You got yours?
Okay. Thank you.
You know, in preparation, like, I make notes. And it's such an amazing read.
Thank you.
It is gospel, it is holy, it just goes against all convention about how Black folks don't tell our secrets and keep stuff hidden. And that stuff turns into other stuff.
Yes,
it
metastasizes.
Yes, sir. And you have gone behind the liver, to where these kind of shames hold themselves, and you have just brought it all out.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you for this book. I'm curious about this. Let's start with the weaponizing of Blackness and gayness.
Sure.
And how you write towards that and where it is, what weapon is it now?
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer is the weapon is the work, the writing. Energy cannot be created nor destroyed. I, as you see on brilliant display in that section, remain disgusted by what America tries to get over on us, all of us, and how. It disgusts me, it does. But I think because, as you soon see that night, I have a wake-up call in the form of this man.
Yeah.
Statistically speaking, it would be far more logical for me to have died that night. And I realized that pretty quickly after surviving it.
Yeah.
And as you see, and the way I write about that evening, I wanted to make it very clear that I do not deserve what happened to me, but how I got to that room is an important part of understanding why it all mattered. Just as much as the violence, just as much as the horror, I wanted to make it clear to readers that look at what America does to us over time. Look at what happens when we become strangers to ourselves. And you meet Daniel soon after and you see what a wreck he is. And so I wanted to demonstrate on the page what a wreck I was. Because I thought I was so angry, and my rage was so wild and undisciplined. Now I think my rage is disciplined, and artful, hopefully. But at the time it was just reckless, and so I just wanted to make noise. I wanted America to hear me. I wanted to feel something. I wanted to be felt, even if it was a punch, because it just all felt so perilous. And by that point, the first chapter of the book is like invoking Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr., and we can talk about that too. But at that point, I was just kind of exhausted with it in a way that, with what's going on now, let's talk about what it is to be an immigrant here. Let's talk about what it means to have family members who have survived the Holocaust in your lifetime, and then are watching what's happening in 2019. Let's talk about Black trans women watching the frequency with which their sisters are murdered, and they don't even get to become hashtags, actually. Their names don't even go viral, right? They don't become headlines, actually. They're grouped together. We meet them as 30 women have died. You know what I mean? So think about, and I think there's a point where you're just, sure, maybe we reach some kind of self-actualization and come together and mobilize and write books, but sometimes I think we're just a mess. And we're angry and we don't know what to do with it. And I wanted to show that. As someone who's gotten past it, I felt it was important to show, an earlier iteration of all of this.
Right, that's amazing. I have an ex.
You do?
I love starting stories like that when my legs cross. I have an ex who would say, you know, after we have exhausted ourselves in a fight, you know, after we have used up all the language, you know, then that signals, like, that's where the story begins.
Yeah.
You know, can you talk about your exhaustion after what America has done to you as a black man, as a gay man, as an artist, as, you know, the product of a single parent household? Like, tell me about that exhaustion, which you took a lot of pride in at one point in your life, like exhausting yourself.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah, I was working so hard.
Right.
Working so hard. I think, you know, I mean, what we realize, I think, is at the end of the exhaustion, it's the end. Like, you can't, it's not the end of your life, but it's the end. Like, it's not creatively generative anymore. You are just repeating the same talking point. Like, you're just kind of like, you know, and I think a lot of people are in that space now. And it's a very vulnerable space to be in, and incredibly dangerous. You know, I think empathy is neutral. So when I say I empathize with people, I'm not trying to say that I agree with them, but I mean, look at these, I call them sentient clan hoods. Look at these people who, whether they realize it or not, 50 years from now, they are all going to be called white supremacists. And the way that when we look at what was going on, you know, in Europe, you know, during World War II, there's no nuance. You're just a Nazi. It doesn't matter your reasons, your economic anxiety, or your, sorry, boo, hate that it's inconvenient for you, you know? So there are a lot of people, I think, in that space, and I think they are exhausted. They've exhausted themselves, the economy's exhausted them, whatever. But for whatever reason, they're fighting for their lives, but they don't know it. And I think when you don't think you're struggling, when you know, you just believe, it's like pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You just, any talking point, you know, President Trump hands to you, you just hold on to it for dear life. You know, even if it, like, he's like, the sky is purple. And you're like, yes, the sky, you know, it's just, there's a cost. And I think that angst and that anxiety, I think they feel it. That's the thing. I think we assume that when people are trying to get something over on us, that the shittiness that they surely are incurring will eventually catch up with them and make them change their minds. I don't think that's actually what happens, usually. It happened with me, but it took someone trying to kill me for me to go, wait a minute, you know? I think most times it turns into wrath, you know, because it's, you know, isn't it better to just step on someone? You know, in The Bluest Eye, I mean, a true analogy to that scene is in The Bluest Eye with Piccola, and Toni Morrison talks about that moment when Piccola's walking home and she feels anger. As a little girl, she feels anger, and that anger feels like power to her, to this dark-skinned black girl who's being sexually abused, has no power, but briefly she feels something. And so when I'm like, the goddamn that's what that moment is, you know, and it's incredibly dangerous. It's incredibly dangerous. And I feel that for me to pretend that I was not like that, to just pretend that I was just this perfect victim and I had no idea what was it just does such a tremendous disservice to what we're all struggling with.
That's amazing. You make me think. You talked about, you know, this future, you know, that you could not see yourself in. You know, if those who are white supremacist adjacent today are white supremacists tomorrow, what about black gay boys? You know, some of whom you mention in the book as your literary ancestors. What became of them if this is their future, and what becomes of us in the next future?
I mean, you know, I guess to look back, I mean, you know, Texas, where I grew up, is interesting. I'm reading a wonderful book about Lawrence Wright's book. I'm sure a few of you have. It's a wonderful book about the history of Texas. Texas has a disproportionate impact on the Supreme Court for all kinds of reasons, and I would argue in part it's very simple. It was once a country. We have a former country in the middle of America that's really large, so it leads to all kinds of important decisions. So one of them, my junior year in high school, is Lawrence v. Texas. That is the law that ended anti-sodomy laws. My junior year, that's what, 2003? I made it to my junior year of high school with the understanding that if a police officer somehow saw me having sex with another man and decided to arrest us, that was legal. To say nothing of the fact that marriage equality was a fantasy at the time. You know, shows like Pose and Steven Universe and, you know, and women like Janet Mock and Laverne Cox and MJ Rodriguez being celebrated on the red, all of that. It's just, I couldn't even fathom it. I couldn't even fathom it. But here we are. Yeah. And it's not a fantasy anymore. Right. Now, America is not exactly doing what I would like for it to be doing right now. You know, that progress is, of course, going on with everything else. But I would like to believe that young queer kids, met some tonight, lovely folks. I would like to think that they get to run a little faster and a little farther and spend a little less time. We all have to do this human work. Everyone, no matter what your identity is, we have to do the work of figuring out who we are, and it is often a real struggle, right? But I would like to think that it's a little less perilous for them. Yeah. And, you know, and then new perils will emerge. That's what it is. But I would like to think, particularly Black queer kids, they exist in a space where I can be on stage with you and, like, I can disagree with RuPaul. Yeah. I can say I don't agree with his politics. I think he's kind of become very conservative and is kind of abandoning genderqueer and trans women in his abrasive drag that is kind of outdated. Yeah. And I don't have to go, well, don't say that on stage because we got to show a united front. There are only 3 of us. Right. There aren't only 3 of us anymore. Right. You know, and that's really important. So that is a tangible aspect of diversity. When I was working at BuzzFeed News, I worked there for 6 years. I was like employee 139. I think by the time I left earlier this year, it was like well over, I don't know how many thousands of people. And I remember talking to another Black coworker, and we were both executive editors at this point. And she said, you know what progress looks like? I was like, what? And she was like, I just saw some Black people in the cafeteria, and not only did I not know their names, I didn't feel the need to walk over there and learn them. Huh. Right. Right? When you're not like, oh, I'm so happy you're here. Oh, hello, come, join us. You know, where you could all sit at one table, you know, like progress is when you get to a space where you go, it's fine, do your thing.
You didn't have to do a secret handshake or
Sure
nothing?
didn't. Who ain't got time for a secret handshake?
You didn't have to do Wakanda, nothing?
No, oh, Wakanda, please. Cheese it.
You know, I do have to tell you, you know, I came out as a Black gay writer in the generation of Black gay men who were dying from AIDS. And, you know, when we think about people like Asoto Saint who constructed this anthology called The Road Before Us, 100 Black Gay Poets, I really think that he was playing the odds. Like if he could name 100 Black gay poets, maybe 4 of us will make it, you know? But it was a greater likelihood that some of us might. You know, but the thing that also happened, because that was a very physical dealing with the pandemic. Right. You know, it was embodied. I feel like what was handed off was a psychic scar. Yes. You know, that's an excellent point. And I wonder if you could talk about how AIDS anxieties and inheriting, you know, this Black gay, you know, impossible future impacted your writing and your self-making.
Yeah, I mean, I'm 33. I was born in 1985, so I would argue that I'm a member of a bridge, in terms of gay men, this bridge generation, where, and you see it at the book, where, because it takes time because we don't have sex ed consistently, and certainly in a way that embraces questions relevant to queer people, it takes so long for accurate queer health relevant information to reach young people. So though, you know, HIV/AIDS medication had been introduced, that already, you know, by the time I was a kid, that meant that, you know, getting HIV was not a death sentence anymore. I didn't know it. Right. By the time I was in middle school, I just assumed, like, you know, if you're going to be gay, probably half of us are going to get HIV/AIDS, and then half of those people are going to die. That's just kind of what I assumed. And then the rest of us will hope we don't end up like Matthew Shepard, to be frank. And then, you know, you grow up and you begin to see, like, meeting, you know, older gay men and that were living who, I wasn't looking at you. I was gesturing to the podium.
Let me tell you about this.
Bitch, you were like, all right. I said all that nice stuff earlier. Okay, I was gesturing to the podium.
Okay, hey,
the
podium.
Hypothetical. But meeting people who had come from a previous generation and who were HIV positive and living happily and productive, and that was to me as radical and transformative as when I was younger, seeing two men in Dallas, Texas, in Oak Lawn, which is like the gay neighborhood there, walk down the street in broad daylight holding hands.
Yeah.
And I followed them down the street. I was in high school and I just kept following this couple because it was, I can't explain to you now, because of course we're, you know, so much has changed, but I can't explain to you what it meant at that time. In broad daylight, to see a happy couple waving to people that they knew, holding hands in broad daylight. It was the light that struck Paul on the way to Damascus. Everything changed. So I grew up in that context, and then, I would say in my age, you know, most of our sexual history until literally a few years ago, every sexual experience was wrapped up in this fear, maybe not of death, but of a medical condition that's going to require energy and resources and treatment. It's not nothing. Right? And now there's PrEP, and congratulations. Gavin Newsom, I think, is making some good decisions on this front.
Very much
okay.
so.
I don't know. He's too handsome. We see, you know, Trudeau, I was like, well, there you go. You get a Disney prince for a politician, and there's a blackface picture in the background. Okay. So, you know, I don't fully know what's going on with Gavin Newsom, but introducing PrEP and making it free to people and making it easier for them to access it, my goodness, that is huge. And I hope that reaches places like the state of Mississippi, where black gay men are dying actually, I would argue, probably even more than during the early years of the plague, you know? So all of this is to say, I'm right in the middle of this, and I have two white gay bees that I mentor, because I feel like if I can get this right, and because I think they're so bright and fun and wild, and loved, that they can impact a lot of people. And they just haven't had this fear. And it's really interesting to see moments of my anxiety pop up and surprise. Even as I've had moments with older, and I'm like, you need to calm down, stop. You know, because I think survivor's guilt, it's all very complicated. You know, but I've surprised myself when, you know, I think when you have suffered or lived with, well, fear is a kind of suffering, right? When you have suffered, and then you see someone who's a different iteration of you, and they just don't even understand. They are that freedom, it is a complicated thing to witness. You are happy for them. And yes, you're jealous. Of course how could you not be? You know, of course you feel a sense of loss. Damn, what kind of hole would I have, you know, of course. Listen, it would have been how we fucked for our lives if I had PrEP. You know, wow, you know.
Page 3 through 98.
So it is fascinating. And so, I, as someone who, and you see the moment in the book where I'm in graduate school and I'm going through, you know, all of Asado Saint, Reginald Shepard, Don Belton, you know, just black gay men whose work meant, Essex Hemphill, whose work meant so much to me. And they were all of them were dead, if not by HIV, AIDS, poverty, or violence. Just every single one of them was dead. And that was really devastating and kind of paralyzing. And so it means a lot to me, and I'm going to try to live for a long time, and I hope you do too. Because I don't want younger writers to experience that.
Right. There is,
Thank
you. You know, we often, you know, men my age.
Go on.
We often, particularly as writers,
I gotta say, the joke of this is that we're black, and I know we look fucking fabulous. I know we both look like we're like 21, so I know y'all are pressed. I know y'all are pressed, but we are also pressed. I just had to say the obvious, you know.
I'm 74. But one of the things is that, when they were dying, when DeSoto was dying, when Donald Woods was dying, when Essex was dying, when Joseph was dying, like, it was as if they didn't sign our literary birth certificates. Right. So there was like this big, like, we went from being writers with them at their knees to being their caregivers, but we didn't have advanced directive set up, so they couldn't name us. So when we were like, I'm the next Essex, they were like, are you? Yeah, exactly. There was no handing off because it seemingly happened so quick that they were taken away from us. This exacting that on another generation of folks, I think you're absolutely right. We cannot afford, to do that.
We can't. And listen, it's difficult. That's why I say, like, that watching that difference, I'm not going to pretend it's always easy and that I always handle it great. My mom and I in the book have a vibrant relationship. We're so warm and loving, but sexuality, like she just couldn't handle it. It was a silence. And I think she was aware of the fact that she was a good parent who couldn't do this one thing. And I think the shame made it even harder. Right. And there are moments in the book where I try to bring up a boyfriend or something in college. And I describe it as like, it's like taking someone who's afraid of heights to the edge of a bridge. And I think we've had that moment where we're particularly as young people with our parents or our grandparents, where we're asking something of them that we need. Can we talk about that time? And you see the tremendous pain. Right. And in that moment, you have to make a decision. And I think often out of love, we disappear. We go, okay, I won't do this to you.
We walk it back.
And so it is hard, all of this difference, even with loved ones, even the people who made you, And I just think we need to say it's hard. I think we need to say it's difficult, that we are all students, maybe some more advanced and experienced than others, but we are all students in life. And saying that does not weaken what we're trying to do. Right. Moms often come up to me after these events and they talk about, genuinely being afraid for their queer kids and feeling overwhelmed or, I've had so many conversations now with grandmothers about pronouns.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm just like, I get, it's new. And I'm just like, I get it. It's new for you. You've lived a long time, you've done a lot, and then all of a sudden language itself. Think about how basic language is, your understanding of it, and how much it impacts your understanding of yourself and the world. And then people are like, no pronouns. You're like, what? Like, I'm not excusing it. I'm not saying that it is not worth it and important, but I do think it's important to go, okay. Let me go through this again. And say, like, and I got to tell you, I mess up sometimes too. And I try to correct myself. Messed up last night at an event, talking about a beloved friend, and had to correct pronouns, in the moment. Okay, and I'm glad I didn't wait or any, like, okay, but we love these people. And we understand what it means to them. You want to talk about pronouns? I tell you what, go to one of your bro friends and say, hey girl. Talk about it. Okay? Listen, I can't tell you how many times as a young person, and you've probably had this too, you're messing around and it's like a mixed group of people and you're just jostling and everything. You say, hey girl, and the guys go, what are you talking about? Everything changes. That, they care about pronouns. Remind them. When they say, oh, I just don't get it. It's just, yes you do. Yes you do. So we have to do this work. It's important. It's about making people feel safe and welcomed and just known. And, maybe someone will say, what you did really hurt me. But more times than not, we don't say it, right? We keep it to ourselves. We go home and we grieve in private. It becomes a silence. And as I said, right when we sat down, it metastasizes. So when I'm reading that part of the book, a terrific bright black mess, that is what it looks like. Years later, You know, there were so many opportunities in the 2 decades that preceded that moment where maybe we could have done another path, and it would have been messy and whatever, but wouldn't it have been worth it? You know, and so I think we have to honor that it is work, and honor that we love people. Yeah. We love people, don't we? And that this is a way to prove it.
Right. But you write that so beautifully. Like, did he deserve it? You know? And if the question is, did you deserve this life? You know, to go through all this, to get to this place? I say yes. You know, it's
I think yes too.
You know, yeah, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you.
In this moment.
Thank you.
Having survived, having done some damage, and
is that what Louis Gluck? I have not always been kind.
Yes. I do want to talk about your mom, particularly, you know, as we talk about AIDS. You know, the scene of the picture of her friend falling out of
another country,
and the registering of attraction to this man, and then hearing the story of insisting you knowing who he was to her, you know, and it was one of the first moments that I registered as you being turned on, you know, in front of your, you know, by something through your mother as well. I want to know more about the relationship between you and your mother, how it impacted your sexuality, and you know, this inching towards trying to tell her, you know, about this sexuality that was coming.
Yeah, I mean, you know, my mom was beautiful. Just conventionally, she was really beautiful. She was a model when she was younger. She didn't graduate from college, but she read 3 newspapers a day. The house was just littered with books. You could like trip over a book if you weren't careful. And we didn't talk about it, but we were all always reading. You know, that was just, you would be reading, I'd be reading. It was just so, and that was really important. And yeah, she was sophisticated. She had been, we were talking about, my mom worked for Delta Airlines. And through her, I know just a whole kind of legion of black women in their 40s and 50s, 60s, working class, who from working class origins, but you know, worked for the airlines and got to see the world. And the way that informed them, you know. And my mom was certainly one of, she traveled everywhere before I was born, you know. And so though she's living paycheck to paycheck as I'm growing up as a kid, and at that point she's a gate agent at the DFW airport, she'd seen a lot. And you know, it was funny. Today I had Japanese beef curry at my hotel, and it was so good. And I was starting to have like a really I wasn't crying, but I was like, this is more than a good meal. And I was like, oh, my mom made this.
Oh my goodness.
Because she would study Japanese recipes. That wasn't unusual. She would study Mexican cuisine. She was all, you know, so we just grew up in a very cosmopolitan household. So, you know, and my mom, the other thing, and my mom practiced Nichiren Buddhism. She chanted Nam-myo Renge-kyo and named me Saeed in reference to it, a fortune baby, which is the idea that if your mother was chanting when you were born, you're like endowed with fortune. So she named me Saeed, which in Arabic means happy and fortunate. You know, so that was the joyful crucible, you know, I lived in. I mean, I think, you know, in terms of sexuality, in terms of my confidence, and I don't mean just like necessarily self-confidence, but like asserting myself, that kind of like, you gotta like see. And what I read, I think I got it from her because she was just such a commanding person, and I saw how people were drawn to her. I saw how she was vulnerable, and you know, she had her insecurities too, but I think she was pretty good about being like, you don't get what's going on here, that's a you problem. You know, and like I would be like, that's a you problem, okay, you know, like trying to like mimic it, you know. So I think I inherited that from her, and it took me a while. Because I didn't think I was beautiful. I didn't think I was handsome in the way that I perceived my mother. I described her as my first diva.
Yes.
You know, so there's a sense of distance there. Actually, I had a very mean middle school history teacher, who was responsible for being the first teacher to teach me about slavery. So buckle up. He was a jerk.
Put his name out there.
Yeah. His name was like, well, I eventually learned his name was Manyard, and I started teasing him, and I got detention for calling him Manyard because of what I'm about to say. But Manyard, I can't remember. You loser, I don't even remember your last name. Anyway, we never got along. I was always like not raising my hands, and history, as I was talking to the students tonight, like the way history is taught in public schools is so politicized and so deceptive. And I think I didn't totally understand, but I felt something was wrong, you know. And so I was always kind of pushing back when he would be talking about slavery and be like, well, some slaves were, I kind of have like, So parent-teacher conference happens. My mom comes, and I'm so excited because I'm like, bad bitch, yes. My mom was like the original hot girl summer, you know, like, I'm like, get ready, you ain't even ready, you know? And she came in, and I remember he was stunned.
Yeah.
She walked in, and I remember, you know, seeing the way men go, you know, that happened. And I was so proud, and then it went on, and he was so nice and whatever. I was like, And I went into class the next day, and I was so excited for once to go to history class because, and I think he knew it. And he walked up to me when, you know, people are trickling in, sitting at their desks, and he said, your mom is so beautiful. And before I could say thank you, he said, what happened to you? Yeah. Yeah, deeply hurtful. So I draw attention to that because it just feels like all of this was just like swirling around. And I think he was like 8th grade history teacher, which like, gosh, what a time. You know, your hormones alone are just crazy. Yeah, but it was all kind of going on at once. And so I just felt, and it's funny, when I was in Austin for the Texas Book Festival, I got to see my 7th and 8th grade English teacher. We stayed in touch, and she's wonderful. She was always so kind. Her name was Roxanne Villarreal. She was just wonderful. And I was like, what was I like? And she was like, you couldn't understand just how bright you were. Like that you had this like energy, and it was just like a matter of like how was it going to kind of shake out? But you just, and I was like, so could you tell I was gay? And she was like,
with that face she did it? Well, you know, I think the way you wrote about this very real woman, like you said earlier, not a literary device. She is up there with Setha and Baby Suggs to me. You fleshed her out, and that could only be from a son. My therapist called me a spouse-ified child too. I was my mama's little man.
Okay, so man of the house.
Man of the house, you know, so you had to be that close to pay that much attention to get these details about her down. Tell me about studying her, like you just, you know.
I mean, I certainly was studying her in the moment, you know, and it was complicated and sometimes painful, right? Like, and what happened to you? And I knew exactly what he meant. It was the perfect dagger. But, you know, as a writer, and in part because, you know, my mom passed away in 2011. It's the last act of the book. The book's in 4 acts. She had a heart attack the night before Mother's Day in 2011, which it just was so awful. And just the way it unfolds, you know, going to visit her, it was all so awful and over the top that in addition to grief just being like this, you always are like, this can't be happening. I really felt like this can't be happening. But it was a part of the book because then it was like, it's time for you to fight for your life's sake. So recognizing that nothing is more vulnerable. I mean, I'm sure, it's so funny, people on my dad's side of the family were like, why aren't we in the book? What? And I was like, read the book, you'll thank me. I was like, no one should want to be in a memoir. At least not written by Saeed Jones. You don't want it, you know, please don't end up in my book. Because I go there. I am always going to go there. I believe, as I've said over and over again tonight, that is a part of the work. And I believe that it is worth the uncomfortableness. With my mom, though, I was like, well, gosh, nothing's more vulnerable than dying, right? It's the absolute loss of control. And I'm going to have to write about that experience. So I tried to, like, how can I do the entire narrative arc in a compassionate way, knowing that eventually so much is going to be taken from her as a character. Knowing that, oh my gosh, it is just all, you're going to see her, you know, in a coma. God, you know, so when she first appears in the novel, it's via a poem that opens the book, and it's very clear that she's not your mom, she's a woman dancing to Prince. You know, I wanted to, from the very beginning, establish that she had a life of her own. that was as rich and as vibrant, as important as her life as my mother, just from the jump, just know that. And then in the first prose chapter, when she walks in, she kind of walks in and immediately kind of walks out.
Yeah.
I have a really important question about that photograph, and she's like,
Right.
and gone. So, because I was trying to just signal to readers, you know, she had a long day of work. Think about what that would be like, just to have a long, challenging day of work. Think about the commute home. Think about how damn hot it is in Texas in May. It's so hot.
And that glass of water every day.
And then you walk home to your gay son who has this like really urgent question about sexuality and health. You know, like that's kind of a lot. I would be tired too, you know, so I want, exactly. She needs to smoke a cigarette first. Like, can you chill, please? And so I felt like that was a way of coloring her humanity. And like, sure, it would have been great if the moment I asked, like, who is this man? Because basically I find a photograph of a dude that I don't know, and I show it to her, and she's like, oh, I've been looking for that. It was a friend of mine. And I'm like, well, what's up? And she's like, we did road trips and everything. And I'm like, she's being very vague. And she's like, well, eventually he found out he got sick, and he killed himself. And she just walks out of the room. She goes to get another glass of wine. And I'm like, what? And she hasn't even said, she never told me his name. I still don't know. I still don't know his name. I don't know anything else about this. We never talked about that man again. Talk about silence. But as she's walking away, I said, because I'm like, what does being, he looks young, he was healthy in my appearance, you know, in his appearance. What does being sick have to do with killing yourself? So I just turned and I say, why did he kill himself? And she just said AIDS and closed her bedroom door. You know, so that's the moment. So like, sure, it would have been great if my mom had said, well, let's talk about HIV/AIDS. Let's talk about the relationship between mental health and physical health. Let's have a whole, let me tell you his name and everything. Let me tell you what it was like, you know, in the years before you were born in 1985. But she was exhausted. And where's the blueprint for that conversation? You know, who are you ready to step up to the moment? And I don't know if I would have done much better either. So I just tried to be true to what happened, but also make space for us to understand, not letting people off the hook, but thinking about the why. And to honor the work, you know, so that when we do break through, we're like, yeah, we did it, you know. And then also just the last thing that was really important to me, for my mom and my grandmother. My mom, a black single mom, you know, working paycheck to paycheck in the South. I just really wanted to fight off the thought bubbles of stereotypes that can overtake that kind of woman and that kind of character. And like my grandmother, a very religious and politically conservative black woman who's lived in Memphis, Tennessee her whole life, thought bubble, you know, and I was like, she doesn't like to cook. It's not like the grandma from Soul Food. She's not a storyteller. Like that's, you know, she's actually really quiet and actually surprisingly Midwestern, though she's a Southerner. So I was trying to, I guess what I'm trying to say is navigate all of those things, because it just felt like, how could I write this book that's about my struggle and the book become a struggle for someone else?
I think you do it wonderfully and beautifully, and you, even the most cruel person in the book, you write them into a humanity. Like, you know that they're just working out their own stuff. You know, your grandmama.
It's going through stuff.
Going through stuff. You know, I don't know if you read the book, but there was some, you know, the scene that just struck me was the prayer scene, where, you know, you realize at some point in the summer that the person at church that they're trying to save from hell is you. You know, right. Where are my cousins? You know, it was.
I was like, everyone's not going to church 5 days a week? That's just me?
Right. You know, and then the cursing of your mom. And they were calling it a prayer.
But it was a curse.
It was a curse, you know, and how that registered and inked itself on you. Can you talk about?
Yeah, I mean, you can read the book, or you have. You know, I think it's a difficult part of the book for me, because it is actually a moment where, in my grandmother's case, as a caregiver, right, someone raising me, she is trying, right? Like, to try to save someone's soul, that seems like a pretty urgent, sincere act, as far as I understand it, you know? That is an act of love. But sometimes when we're doing the work, when we are doing something out of love, America can mangle that loving gesture into another harm. You know, my grandmother basically took me to the front of the church and was like, this is my grandson Saeed from Texas, and his mother is Buddhist. And that was it. And the pastor, who of course didn't know me, definitely didn't know my mom, you know, instead of saying like, oh God, you know, show him your love, help him understand, you know, that's one way it could have gone. You know, I probably still wouldn't have been persuaded, but he could have done it. But instead he was like, you know, one of your children has strayed from the light and decided to take her son with her. And I was so overwhelmed because we're at the front of the, you know, I was like, I could barely understand what he was saying. And then he said, make her suffer. And I just, you know, and listen, you know, writing a memoir is crazy because you have to create dialogue and do all of these, use all of these fictive elements to, you know, try to tell the truth, right? And so you're asking a lot of readers, right? And so dialogue is, you know, it's a reconstruction. Right. I remember exactly what that man said. I will always remember what he said. And he's just like, make her suffer and show her your plagues and, you know, every illness and ailment upon her so that she will, you know, just realize that she's gone off and needs to come back and bring him with her. Wow. What a twisted, warped, disturbing perception of the God you believe in.
Right.
You know? I mean, this is, what? And it just, so it was so awful. And of course, I'm kneeling, holding my mother's hand. And so I'm just like, kind of look at her, like, are you hearing this?
Right.
You know, it was so awful because it was deeply hurtful, but doubly so because I really do feel, and listen, my grandmother's read the book. Yeah. I asked her what she thought about the first third, and she just said it brought back a lot of memories.
Oh, wow.
You know, she didn't, and that's where that scene takes place. Like, she is never, like, when, in graduate school, my mom called me and was like, you know, I told Mom, you said you want to write a memoir one day, and I had to explain what that is, and I, like, froze in my steps on the phone. And I was like, well, what did she say? Uh-oh. You know, and as I've noted, my grandmother is a pretty terse woman. So note that she's not apologizing. She's not making excuses. She's not saying, well, Saeed he just didn't understand. What, you know, not reframing, not trying to get it, you know, and I talked to her a couple of times while I was writing the book, and she would just listen. I'd be like, and it was so, it's funny, like, my family is so well-versed in silence that I bet if you listen to one of our phone calls, she'd be like, what the fuck are y'all talking about? What is going on? You know, because they're like no pronouns or verbs. Right. But I was like, you know, I'm writing this memoir, and I'm going to write about, you know, and you know, and she's like, and listen, I'm going to try to do a good job because, you know, and now we're different, and you know, and she just, like, that's how we talk about it. Oh my God. But she trusted me. She trusted me. She didn't say, please don't write that book. She didn't say, well, what are you going to, you know, show it to me? Yeah. She just said, okay. You know? And so I sent her the galley before it went out because I was like, listen, I sent it to her, my Uncle Albert, who you see a bit in the book as well, the stand-up man,
yes,
a good guy, and my mom's sister, Celia. And, you know, just because I was like, listen, I was like, let me be very clear. What happened, happened. If you wanted something different to happen, then you should have acted differently. That's how I feel. You know, I'm the Mary Carr school of, you know, writing about family members. But I was like, I need you to trust that I wrote this with compassion because I did. I worked really hard. So I was like, I'm sending this to you because I don't want strangers reading about you before you do. I don't want you, you know, getting a call from one of your church friends being like, oh, I heard so-and-so, my grandson was in San Francisco, and did you hear? You know, no, I want you to, you know, and you can call me and we can talk. And we did. Yeah. And we had really warm, deep, powerful conversations. Yeah. Because of the book, you know. And so I felt, you know, deeply honored that my grandmother handled and continues to handle what has happened in the book. I mean, now a lot of people are reading. I think we were all kind of like, well, maybe no one will read it.
Yeah.
You know, because I'm a poet. It's just like, it'll be fine. I can put all kinds of shit in poems, but here y'all are. Oh my God, you know. So yeah, I felt just a tremendous, you know, my gosh, I was doing an interview in Austin, and the interviewer at the end was like, I think this should be a movie. And I was like, oh shit. Yeah. It's like, I call grandma again, I guess. Let her know. You know, so just knowing how things can take off, it just felt really important. One, I wanted to do a good job. I wanted to do a good job. We have changed. My grandmother was devastated. Remains devastated. I know that. I've seen her. It was a blow.
I miss that
Watching
girl.
her youngest, I miss that girl so much. I miss that woman.
I miss that woman, yes.
I miss that woman. She said to me on the phone about 2 years after my mom died. You know, but I felt that though I have no problem going there when it's about me, as you see, right? Like we'll all go there. I felt with them, they trusted me. They didn't try to control the story. They didn't try to run crisis PR or anything. And they certainly didn't ask for this book to be written in this way. And so I felt that I needed to do right by them. Just one, because that's the right thing to do. And I'm writing a book about, in some ways, ethics, right? And so I need to try to do it in an ethical way. But also, no, that is it. That is it.
You know, I think as Black gay boys, showing up into families that have never seen,
or think they haven't.
But definitely you were the first to show up. You like Saeed.
Like this.
Yes. And I sometimes, you know, at my most compassionate, like they didn't know if they needed to beat their story into us or love their story into us, but they knew that we were going to hold the story, you know, and they got it in our skin and in our body the best ways that with the tools that they had. And I think you are telling her story in ways that she probably couldn't even imagine.
I mean, that's a very, I would like to think so. I mean, I don't want you to read this book and go, she's just awful, or God, his mom, you know, or his mom is such a tragic figure, which is probably like the real risk with my mom. You know, I want you to go, wow, they tried really hard, and it still was difficult. And wow, you know, and that's why it's how we fight for our lives. I don't want you to read about me and my family and go, gosh, those folks, it's just so hard for them. And then you're like, okay. No. It's everything's in conversation with your reality and your personal history. And that is true if you see parallels. And you're like, oh God, I felt that way too, you know? And the parallels can be very unexpected. That's not necessarily an identity parallel. Or difference. I've never felt that way. I've never, my grandmother and I, we talk about everything. Awesome. Then appreciate that relationship and know that it's not like that for everyone. You know, I really want it to be this conversation. One, because I feel like it's my attempt, particularly in that litany of all the like kind of the white male cultural canon, you know, a way of explaining that this book is not like a small part of the American story. I believe that if you want to better understand America, I'm a pretty good door to walk through. Thank you.
Come on, Dor. I need to do a time check because I can't.
It could be 2 o'clock in the morning for all I know. Yeah, sure.
Let's open it up to some questions.
I love it.
What y'all got for Saeed?
Ooh, the lights. Hello. You're all so pretty. Hi.
The first one's over here on your left. Hi, Saeed.
Hi.
I've been following you on Twitter for a long time, so it's really interesting to like have read the book and then see you in real life. I have a question about how you balance being like a public figure with actually doing the private work of writing. I know you've had like a big move to Ohio and you're pretty jazzed about that, but how do you balance being this external Twitter figure as well as a serious writer? What do you keep for yourself?
Yeah. OHIO. I saw you, girl. I got you, boo. HIO. I love it. Go Buckeyes. I'm flying home tomorrow. I'm so excited. It'll be my first time back in Columbus since October 6th. Wow. So it's been a lot of travel. You know, here's the thing. I am actually an introvert. I understand the value of public discourse and of performance, and I believe it's an effective tool for change. And I'm good at it. So I'm willing to do this. But the reason I say I'm not an extrovert is that I'm not like drawing strength from this. This is work, and I don't mean it's painful or anything, I mean it's rigor, right? Whereas I think if you're extroverted, you're like looking for and I'm like, my God, oh, I could not.
That's a lot.
Yeah, you know what I mean? So I go to the party or I do the event and everything like that, and then I go home and I'm like silent. I'm actually a very quiet person when I'm on my own, and I love silence. And just because I can just hear myself thinking. I love, unexpectedly, travel days, because, you know, when you're traveling from, where did I come from? LA to here, and, you know, Austin to LA or Houston to what, it's a lot of just quiet time, and you're only speaking when you're like, oh yeah, I'll have that, thank you, you know, and that's it. So that's part of it. That there are just deep wells of silence that people just don't understand because of the second aspect, which is, I think, wow, I'm gonna say I'm good. I'm good. Good public figures, there's a magic act that happens where we go, oh, hi, I'll talk to you about this, and isn't that funny, and this, and and you're just like not even paying attention to what we're doing with our other hand. There's so much that I just don't talk about, so much. And you know, and the things I choose to talk about, I think maybe for other people they would go, well, I would never talk about that. Or I would never admit that Jason Momoa's thighs are, don't you want him to crush you with them? Quit lying. We all want to have our head placed between Jason Momoa's thighs and just let him have his way with us. Be honest, be honest. Thank you, thank you. Now for a lot of people it would be like, well, I would never say that, and I certainly wouldn't say that on stage as a book event. I get it, but for me, that's like cheap currency to give away.
Yeah.
That's not a deep, soulful confession. Does that make sense? So you know, and I have a therapist. So that's kind of it. That's kind of it. And I'm always, what did Gia Tolentino say? Always be optimizing. Like I'm always trying to learn. And you know, I was executive editor of culture at BuzzFeed, and you know all this. I'm watching, and I'm trying to learn from my peers. And that's one of the benefits of social media, is that you can like literally see how it's all shaking out, and learning from how I feel in the moment, and things change. You know, maybe we get to a point where I get a little quieter on Twitter. It's already kind of happening just because I'm busy and I don't have time to read as deeply as I think everyone should before we talk about certain things. Like, have you read a book on that thing you're now talking about? So, you know, it's already happening that things are going, and I go to tweet and I go, I don't really know.
Right.
I'll just let it go. You know, whereas before I had time. So, yeah, I try to rest and know that I have this rich interior life, and I just try to keep learning.
Next question's right in the middle.
Oh, hello.
I was fascinated when you used the word pronouns. I don't know if you discuss it in the book. It seems to be a lately thing. Soon after I retired 6 years ago, I volunteered at the LGBT Center. And they liked the way I related to the people who came in. I was working the front desk and everything. And I had a problem because I would see somebody and I would assume that a man was a man, a woman was a woman. And I would say he, and they wanted it to be she. Or I would say she, and you wanted it to be, I was always confusing with, and they said, if you have a problem like that, just use they and them, which offended me as an ex-English teacher, because that's plural. You know, I'm not going to refer to a single person as they or them. And I just wanted to know any more thoughts you had about that. I mean, they dismissed me working the desk. I'm still on call if they need me for the Folsom Street Fair or anything like that. But they didn't want me to work the desk and use the wrong pronoun. So. You just said they.
Okay, here's what I would say. Here's what I would say. As someone who has 2 degrees in creative writing, when you care about something, you do the work, right? It's really difficult to become a literature professor. It's incredibly rigorous. You read untold number of books that I would pay someone to not make me read, to get that accreditation, to get that honorific, because you understand the value of it. You have to choose. Either you're going to be the person who makes people feel safer or not. And it's not to say that it doesn't take work. It's not to say that it doesn't require a change in worldview. I hear what you're trying to say. You're like, well, you know, I'm reading context clues and making inferences. Okay. But that's not what people are asking of us anymore, right? Just as there was a time where people didn't have to ask of anyone that, you know, if a black person was walking down the street, maybe we shouldn't assume that the black person needs to step into the curb the moment a white person's coming down the street. That was totally legit, you know? That was fine for a lot of people, for generations, right? And then we got to a point where we said, we gotta change the way we think about this because it's important. Okay, so I do want to honor that it is a change. And of course, as I said before, like language connects to everything. So it's a lot. It's not a small thing, but I think it is worth the work. And I think you clearly, as someone who has demonstrated your value of language and people. I hate working at reception desks, never. But you care to do it, right? And so I think you should follow through, okay? Thank you.
That's good.
Sure. Oh, okay. And then we'll come to you. You're being very patient. We'll get to you.
Do you want to hold it? Hi, thank you so much for being here. What an amazing evening. Thank you so much. I wanted to add on or ask one or two questions regarding the work. I am a theater professional. I'm a professor. I teach. I worked really hard to get my master's degree in drama lit. And I also came to a point when I moved out here to San Francisco from Ohio.
We're everywhere.
But I'm from New York.
Okay.
I've lived all over, but that's another story. I have a student who has taught me, because I teach at a state university, and pronouns have become a huge thing, especially since I've been here, and learning and understanding the incredible, diverse and beautiful power of my students. And as an acting teacher as well, my success has been in helping my students feel safe, like you just brought up, that I was determined to do the work. I have a student, they identify as a male, as a young man. You would look at them and see a woman, but that's how they identify. And I went through many periods. This is in a dance class. I'm a choreographer. And I asked all the men to go to one side and all the women to go to another side, and then they stood there and with their hands on their hips. And I wanted to ask you about this journey, as what you said, if you really care. I wanted to add that to race. My experiences have been vast. And I'd love to hear what your thoughts about that particular work in regarding the fragility of people that don't understand the microaggressive nature of, you talked about it a little bit earlier. I was wondering if you could just elaborate a little bit more, because I love your thoughts.
Thank you. I mean, well, I think it's in some ways pretty simple. The more power we have, in any regard, the lazier we are for that difference differential, right? You just start, you know, like, I entered, when I was in New York a few years ago, I was working out with a personal trainer a lot. And I got pretty good actually at squatting. It was like a whole thing. I was like, oh my God. And it was like, you know, New York is all crazy. And I was like working out to like literally the actor who plays Bucky in the Marvel movies. And I was like, right next to him. I was like, I was so proud of myself. And then, you know, I ended up hurting one of my feet. And I say all that to say that for weeks, it was really difficult for me to walk and very unpredictable. and getting around the New York subways, it would take me, like, suddenly I would be late for work. You know, the 2-level subway platforms were like my new worst nightmare, because it was like, oh no. And I'd be like slowly going up, and here's like an old black lady in Harlem beating me, just like, damn, you know, just like, oh God. So I say all that's to say though, you know, I'm able-bodied. Generally speaking, it's no big deal. I just take it I never even thought about the fact that so many New York subways don't have elevators and escalators, right? And then, whew, was that a wake-up call? So I think that's the thing that people just need to understand. We are lazy in so many ways because of our power. And we all have it. We all have it. You know, I'm a black gay man in America, and I am wealthier than most other black gay men, right? In a lot of different ways. You could talk about that in regards to health. You could talk about that in regards to financial security, to literary opportunities. I am the 1% in a certain regard, and I need to own that. There are blind spots that I need to account for. So I think with race or pronouns or gender, that's the thing. We need to know that we are getting over on somebody, right? And as I said before, if you think you're not fighting, if you think you're not struggling, if you think you're not the problem, if you think you're the exception to the rule, and damn near every white person probably does. I can't tell. It's always the people, it's always the people who think they are liberal and agree with me and right on that usually say the most fucked up shit to me. Without fail. And listen, I understand that people in the audience are like, well, wait a minute, and I'm like, because it's not about how I feel about you. It's not about the figurative gold star that you're looking. Do the work because the work is important, right? And I'm studying Black history to better understand it. I'm rereading and talking about nonstop Isabel Wilkerson's The Warmth of Other Suns, because it's essential to understanding American history. You should too. You should too, you know, and we all have to do these works. I'm reading books by trans and genderqueer people to better understand it. Yeah. There's so much work we have to do. What does it mean to be a gay man and realize that maybe I'm not attracted to trans men? Whoa, that's different. How do I navigate that? It's just a preference. Wow, you know, there's so much work we have to do, but it requires us just getting over the ego, getting over the need to perform and please people. Like, hey, trans friends, I got it right, you know, like I got no, that's not what it's about, you know. And so I think it requires us developing a different relationship to putting in the work, because America is all about like E for effort, and here you go, congratulations, show off. You know, show off your report card. But if we're really going to break through as people, it's just going to be private. I think. Yeah. Ooh.
Hi. You tweeted a video somewhat recently that was Anderson Cooper and Stephen Colbert in conversation, basically about grief. Sorry.
Yeah, a moment. Did y'all raise your hand if you know what we're talking about, the Anderson Cooper and Stephen Colbert on grief? Watch it. Yeah.
So part of it was kind of how, if ever, do you reach a place where you learn to be thankful for the worst thing that's ever happened to you? And I kind of wonder what your take on that is, or just the grieving process, especially now after having this wildly successful book in which your mom's an integral part.
Yeah, so you know, Anderson Cooper's mother passed away recently, and they were very close. I think he has spoken about that often. And Stephen Colbert, that I did not know until I watched that conversation, that he experienced tremendous, bizarre loss earlier in his life, just incredibly tragic. And so they were talking about grief, and it was, you know, I tend to not, one day I'm going to run into Anderson and you'll be like, what bitch? But generally speaking, I find Anderson somewhat cold. And I think, to speak on racial politics, like when Anderson asked AOC, you know, do you think the president is racist? And she was like, yes. And he says, how can you say that? I'm like, you got some work to do, you know. Anyway. That doesn't negate that, you know, there is value, you know, and so they had this tremendous conversation, and it was very clear that Anderson was using the auspices of the interview, his profession, to actually learn some stuff. How could this, I miss my, it was so clear that he was basically, I miss my mother so much. And I've read what you've said about grief, and you said that it was a good thing in the end. How could this possibly be good? You know? Whew. And yeah, I get that. I mean, I think please watch it because it's long and so much nuance. And I think they talk about Lord of the Rings at some point, and I was like crying, and I was like, these niggas are talking about Lord of the Rings. But it was just like so deep. You know, I think grief, the reality of grief over time comes to eventually defy language. At the beginning, you know, it's ready-made. You can just say it's so awful. And people just nod because Americans just absolutely want to move on. They're just like waiting to like have an excuse to move on, right? So you just say it's awful. Or you just cry and you honor it, and we know what to do with that. But it's non-linear. You know, I always tell people, like, you could be walking, it actually happened when I was living in San Francisco. And this was 2 years or 3 years after my mom passed away. I was walking down the street one day, and a woman walked by wearing the Clinique perfume my mom wore. And I was on my way to dinner in the Mission, and if you saw me, you would have just seen me standing on the sidewalk, just kind of going in circles for a moment. I was so thrown. It was like I was back at square one. How could this have happened? You know? So grief just defies, because it's physiological. It's not just like an idea. It's not just a memory. It's something in your body. I think I'm convinced it rearranges some aspect of your genetic code, to be honest. So I think it gets to a point where you can't even quantify your relationship or qualify your relationship to it, because it's like I can't quantify or qualify my relationship to being Black anymore or being queer. It's just so much of me. I don't remember when it begins and ends. And grief, I think, begins to feel that way. And so my sense is it is the most humanizing thing that can ever happen to you. And it is incredibly awful, but it's almost like grief for someone you really love, and it could be a pet, it could be a teacher, it could be a friend, it could be a lover, it could be an ex, it could be someone you had a terrible relationship with, right? It could be a celebrity, you know? Grief is like you have hidden stores of gasoline in your body. You don't know how much. Maybe you think you know, but you don't know how much. Only when grief burns up all the gasoline do you fully understand how deep the love goes. And that is a beautiful, important thing. I relate to people better now because of having had that experience. It is easier for me to empathize with total strangers now. Am I glad it happened? No, of course not. But I understand it in the fullness of time as something being valuable. And I think Stephen Colbert said that beautifully. Yeah.
Next question on your right.
Okay. Hello.
Hello, I'm the next question on your right. How are you?
Oh, hi.
Hi. So first, your words are spectacularly visual. I mean, just thank you so much. The images are floating out there along with the syllables and the prepositional phrases and the pronouns. Fabulous. The marvelous minister on your left, who I have had the pleasure of now sitting on Sunday mornings and listening and being taught by you and hearing your wisdom and letting it come all over me and recognizing how it brings forth questions that I've never even thought to ask, which reminded me when you said that there's that whole other piece of you behind that we don't get to see. So while you've been on book tour, Saeed, has somebody asked you that question that made you bring that forth? Or has a question been asked where it stopped you in your tracks and you were like, I want to go there, but I'm not going to go there. I don't feel safe to go there. Or has something come up that you've just are like, gosh, I wish somebody would ask me this question because I'm ready to say it?
Oh, wow. I think someone asked me that earlier, and I was like, I don't think so. People have been, generally speaking, incredibly kind. And I experience these events as an opportunity to learn from you, and I try to just be in the moment. So I don't know, it's neat to talk about the book cover, maybe. I haven't really gotten to talk about that. Someone asked it on Twitter today, and I nerded out about it. Can I talk about the book cover for a moment? Is that okay? She asked, and I was like, oh. Because I haven't talked about it in an event. So the book cover, I have a theory that like all gay men, all of us, every single one, No nuance. Loved Greek mythology when we were kids. Uh-huh. And collected rocks. Gotcha. Okay, so there is a scene, you see me with my rock collection. And so I wanted the cover to refer to stones, to some of those precious stones, and I wanted it to be a volcanic stone, like malachite or jasper, because they have a fluidity, like it's a rock, it's hard, right? But you see like this kind of femininity and this kind of transformation, which is, so important. And then I wanted the writing to look like Basquiat kind of slashes, like the rage, so that you're seeing this tension between the fluidity, the hardness, and solid and movement. But the cover was going to be lapis lazuli. It was like very similar, but that kind of blue with the gold flecks. And I just happened to be in a group text with some great people, one of whom is Marlon James. And all Black writers do actually know one another. Yeah, even the ghost. Lucille Clifton and I were having a great conversation about Jason Momoa's thighs just minutes ago.
Oh, wow.
But Marlon was like, people will respond to red, to heat. So like ask for one more version. And so that's how we ended up with the cover. And I don't know, I like that it looks like a lot of things. I also like that it's kind of burning. It kind of looks hot to the touch. Sometimes it kind of looks like food, like a fruit. And sometimes it makes me think of the womb, the heart, this internal, there's all of this kind of going on. And I don't know, I mean, it's interesting, book covers are really important. And you have to find a very concise way to create a response in a stranger, like when they're walking past a window or something, and you hope that response aligns with the truth of the book. And I think we did it. Yeah. Thank you. I should start collecting rocks again. I keep a rock, Jenna Wortham, Jenna Wortham is still processing. I was like, okay, so girl, people are coming out of the woodworks for this book tour. What do I do? And she said, keep a piece of black tourmaline in your pocket at all times. So I have backups in my suitcase.
Wow, what does it do?
I think it like wards off, old ghosts and
X's?
Just, yeah.
That's
okay,
amazing.
we've got time for one last question. I just want to remind you all that Saeed will be signing books afterwards, so please buy a book or a few.
All right, make Oprah proud. Come on.
Good evening. My question is about identity. So you've talked about your Black lens and queer lens as almost indelible parts of your identity. And one of the things I've been exploring as, in Buddhism or Eastern religions that talk about no self is about a letting go of these even layers and lenses and the narratives that can come along with however we're seeing things. In the beginning of your talk, you were inveighing against contemporary America and all of these, the microaggressions and all of these things that happen just as a course of living. And so oftentimes there can be a narrative that's attached with actions that makes it much more painful, oftentimes from people who don't even know what they're doing or why it is so painful. And so how do you, I guess my broader question is about your practice of letting go. I know a little bit about your silence, but how do you decide which part of you, how do you even let go some of the things that are so central to you?
I get it.
Yeah.
How do you, because if on any given day I held on to every microaggression or thought or heartbreaking headline, I would, burn out pretty quickly. We do all kinds of things. I rest, as I mentioned, so there's that. But, I write about things. I sit with them and over years and then work them into my writing. And you see some of that in the book. There are moments when I kind of pause the narrative and go big picture for that reason. I talk to friends. I mentioned group texts, but I really believe in them. Having these private spaces where 4 or 5 of your friends, no matter where you are in the country or whatever, can be there for one another is powerful. And one of them would just, and often like one group text that I've been in since like 2015 now, it started just because we all went to a party and wanted to exchange contact info, like we weren't trying to, and it was like pretty infrequent communication. And then 2016 happened. election night. And I woke up the next day and everyone was in the group text saying, "Are you okay? How are you feeling?" And you know, and often we're being silly and kikiing and da-da-da-da-da, but it's a space. So I think it's helpful. You know, the thing about microaggressions and just harm is what I find most painful is that someone does something shitty and then they leave you holding the bag. And you're like, wait a minute. You know what I mean? They're already like way down. You're like, what do I do with this thing you just shoved into my arms? You know, this grief baby to deal with, you know? And so I think it helps to go talk to other people and be like, what do we? And they go, put it down. Right. You know, it's not yours, you know? So I think that helps tremendously. And, you know, whether that's literary stuff, writing, the business, because it is a business, right? Or just life, you know, connecting with people. So that you don't feel alone. I over and over again, I say that I just think people are at their most vulnerable when they think they are the only one experiencing what they're experiencing. So I guess, generally speaking, my impulse is to go connect with someone. Even if they are not picking up what I'm putting down, just the act of evoking what I'm saying, I think begins to help me. And then, you know, I try to remember the things that are going great for my life and the broader mission, and I try to move on. Not necessarily to forget, but to know that I will have many more opportunities to speak on it. Like the other day, I mentioned this to the group I spoke to earlier, and this will be the last thing I say. I had a really lazy interviewer who I'm not sure read the book, or maybe he's just dumb. Either way, it irritated me. And we sat down and it was a recorded podcast, and you know, you usually do an interview like, hey, this is the da-da-da-da-da, and I'm so-and-so and so, and I'm sitting here with author of the, you know. And instead we sit down and I was like, Mike, da-da-da, and he said, so, what's it been like traveling the country talking to so many people about your mom dying? And like, that's where the conversation went. That's where it started and that's where it ended. Like, that was it. And listen, we've gone there tonight, right? I do not shy away from this. But there's a way to have these conversations with nuance that's respectful and thoughtful for everyone involved. And it just really pissed me off. And what I just think is so damn funny is I have 125,000 followers on Twitter. I'm doing a book tour. I write personal essays about why the hell would you want to piss me off in that way? Isn't it pretty apparent that at some point I'm gonna get on stage and talk about it, you know? So I'm able to move on because I know that I have the tremendous fortune to being someone who can go, let me tell you about this bullshit, you know? And that allows me to not feel overwhelmed by it. So, thank you.
Y'all need to buy this book. You need to read this book. If you are living today, you were in a fight and you fought to get here. So you're either getting beat up, but you need to know after reading this book that you are in a fight. And there is a way to fight your way through it. And it doesn't matter if you are black, gay, straight. This is a book that will show you all you need to do to survive in this country. So we're gonna be out in the lobby, signing books, kiki in, come say hi. And one more time for Saeed Jones, everybody.
Thank you.